René Descartes is widely regarded as the father of modern philosophy, a title that reflects his profound influence on the way humans understand knowledge, existence, and reason. His intellectual contributions reshaped philosophical inquiry, breaking away from medieval traditions and laying the foundations for a new, rationalist approach to thought. More than just a philosopher, Descartes was also a mathematician and scientist, whose work in analytical geometry and physics contributed significantly to the advancement of modern science. His method of doubt, encapsulated in the famous phrase cogito, ergo sum I think, therefore I am, revolutionized epistemology by emphasizing reason as the primary source of certainty. Through his works, Descartes fundamentally altered the trajectory of Western philosophy, setting the stage for subsequent intellectual movements such as the Enlightenment. Born in 1596 in La Haye in Touraine, France, Descartes lived during a period of great scientific and philosophical transformation. The Renaissance had rekindled interest in classical knowledge, and the scientific revolution was beginning to challenge long-standing Aristotelian doctrines. Traditional scholastic philosophy, which had dominated European intellectual thought for centuries, was deeply intertwined with religious dogma and relied heavily on the authority of past scholars. Descartes, however, sought to free philosophy from these constraints by introducing a new method of inquiry, one based on doubt, systematic reasoning, and logical deduction. Before Descartes, knowledge was largely built on the assumption that certain truths could be accepted based on tradition or divine revelation. Scholasticism, the dominant philosophical framework of the time, attempted to reconcile Aristotelian logic with Christian theology. However, Descartes recognized the limitations of this approach, as it relied on premises that could not always be verified through independent reasoning. He argued that in order to establish true knowledge, one must begin by doubting everything that could possibly be false, and then rebuild knowledge from a foundation of absolute certainty. This radical departure from previous methods marked the beginning of what is now known as the Cartesian method. Descartes' influence extended beyond philosophy, reaching into the fields of mathematics and science. He developed Cartesian coordinates, which provided a systematic way of describing geometric shapes using algebra, a breakthrough that laid the groundwork for modern analytical geometry. His contributions to optics and physics further demonstrated his commitment to a rational and mechanistic understanding of the universe. By advocating for a mathematical approach to nature, Descartes helped solidify the scientific method, which would later be refined by figures such as Isaac Newton. His belief that the world operated according to fixed, discoverable laws challenged the view that natural phenomena were the result of divine intervention, a perspective that was still widely held at the time. Despite his revolutionary ideas, Descartes faced significant resistance from religious and academic institutions. His philosophy was seen as a direct challenge to traditional beliefs, and his works were even banned by the Catholic Church. However, his ideas could not be easily dismissed, as they provided a compelling framework for understanding reality through reason rather than faith. His emphasis on the power of human intellect influenced later thinkers, including Baruch Spinoza, Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, and Immanuel Kant, all of whom engaged with and expanded upon his ideas in their own philosophical inquiries. One of the most remarkable aspects of Descartes' philosophy is his unwavering commitment to certainty. Unlike earlier thinkers who accepted knowledge based on external authorities, Descartes insisted that true knowledge must be grounded in something indubitable. This led him to his famous cogito, ergo sum argument, which established self-awareness as the only undeniable truth. By beginning with this foundational principle, he sought to construct a reliable framework for knowledge that could withstand even the most extreme skepticism. This approach had a lasting impact on epistemology and remains a central topic in philosophical discussions to this day. Beyond philosophy, Descartes' rationalist approach influenced the development of modern psychology, neuroscience, and artificial intelligence. His concept of mind-body dualism, which separates mental processes from physical ones, has shaped debates on consciousness and the nature of human cognition. While modern science has largely moved beyond strict Cartesian dualism, the questions Descartes raised about the relationship between the mind and the body continue to drive research in fields such as cognitive science and philosophy of mind. His work serves as an early example of the intersection between philosophy and empirical science, a relationship that continues to evolve in contemporary thought. Descartes' philosophical contributions also had political implications, as they encouraged individuals to think independently rather than rely on traditional authorities. His emphasis on reason and doubt laid the intellectual groundwork for the Enlightenment, a period characterized by the promotion of scientific reasoning, democracy, and individual rights. Many Enlightenment thinkers, such as Voltaire and John Locke, drew inspiration from Descartes' ideas when formulating their own theories on governance, human rights, and social progress. In this way, Descartes' legacy extends far beyond philosophy, shaping the very foundations of modern Western civilization. Despite his monumental contributions, Descartes remained a controversial figure throughout his lifetime. His radical skepticism and mechanistic worldview were perceived by some as dangerously subversive, while others saw them as a necessary evolution of human thought. Even after his death in 1650, debates over his ideas continued, influencing generations of philosophers, scientists, and intellectuals. Today, Descartes is remembered not only as a pioneer of rationalist philosophy, but also as a thinker whose work continues to inspire new ways of understanding the world. René Descartes' impact on philosophy, mathematics, and science is immeasurable. By challenging existing intellectual traditions and advocating for a rationalist approach to knowledge, he forever changed the course of human thought. His method of doubt, emphasis on reason, and pursuit of certainty laid the foundation for modern philosophy and scientific inquiry. Though his ideas were often met with resistance, they ultimately paved the way for some of the most significant advancements in Western intellectual history. As we continue to explore the nature of reality and knowledge, Descartes' legacy remains as relevant as ever. René Descartes was born on March 31st, 1596, in La Haye-en-Touraine, a small town in France that was later renamed Descartes in his honor. He was born into a relatively wealthy and well-connected family, which provided him with the resources necessary for a rigorous education. His father, Joachim Descartes, was a lawyer and a member of the Parliament of Brittany, a regional legislative body in France. His mother, Jean Brochard, died when René was just 1 year old, leaving him to be raised primarily by his grandmother and other relatives. This early loss may have contributed to Descartes' lifelong interest in questions about existence, mortality, and the nature of the human soul. From a young age, Descartes displayed an exceptional intellectual curiosity. Recognizing his potential, his family arranged for him to receive a formal education at the prestigious Jesuit College of La Flèche, one of the finest schools in France at the time. The Jesuits, known for their rigorous academic training and emphasis on classical learning, provided Descartes with a solid foundation in literature, philosophy, and science. The curriculum at La Flèche was heavily influenced by Aristotelian and scholastic traditions, which sought to reconcile reason with Christian theology. While Descartes absorbed these teachings, he would later come to question their validity, searching for a more independent and rational foundation for knowledge. During his years at La Flèche, Descartes developed a deep appreciation for mathematics. Unlike other fields of study, which often relied on authority and interpretation, mathematics appeared to provide certainty through logical deduction. He was particularly fascinated by geometry, which demonstrated how complex truths could be derived from simple, self-evident principles. This realization planted the seeds for his later philosophical work, where he sought to apply the same method of clarity and precision found in mathematics to all branches of human knowledge. Descartes' education also included extensive training in Latin, classical literature, and metaphysics. He studied the works of ancient philosophers such as Aristotle and Cicero, as well as medieval theologians like Thomas Aquinas. While he respected their intellectual achievements, he found many of their arguments to be based on assumptions rather than clear reasoning. His dissatisfaction with traditional philosophy grew, leading him to believe that a new method of inquiry was necessary, one that did not rely on past authorities, but instead sought to establish knowledge from first principles. A significant feature of his education at La Flèche was its emphasis on the harmony between faith and reason. The Jesuits encouraged students to use rational thought to support religious beliefs, but Descartes' later work would challenge the notion that faith alone could serve as a foundation for knowledge. Although he remained a believer in God throughout his life, his approach to philosophy sought to prove the existence of God through reason rather than religious doctrine. This rationalist perspective would become a hallmark of his philosophical contributions and a source of both admiration and controversy. Upon completing his studies at La Flèche in 1614, Descartes enrolled at the University of Poitiers, where he pursued a degree in law. His father had hoped that he would follow in his footsteps and become a lawyer, a respectable and financially stable career. However, Descartes found little passion for legal studies, as they were based on precedent and tradition rather than the kind of clear reasoning he admired in mathematics. Though he completed his law degree in 1616, he never practiced law, as his intellectual interests lay elsewhere. It was during this period that Descartes began to develop a sense of intellectual independence. He grew increasingly skeptical of the traditional methods of acquiring knowledge and started to explore alternative ways of thinking. Rather than accepting ideas based on tradition or authority, he sought to question everything until he could establish an indubitable foundation for knowledge. This approach would later culminate in his famous method of doubt, which became the cornerstone of his philosophical investigations. After finishing his formal education, Descartes embarked on a period of travel and exploration, which would further shape his philosophical outlook. He believed that exposure to different perspectives and experiences was essential for intellectual growth. In 1618, he joined the army of Prince Maurice of Nassau in the Dutch Republic, not out of a desire for military service, but because he saw it as an opportunity to expand his understanding of the world. It was during his time in the military that he encountered prominent scientists and mathematicians who introduced him to the latest developments in physics and astronomy. Descartes' early years of education and intellectual development played a crucial role in shaping his future contributions to philosophy and science. While he initially followed the conventional path of a privileged young scholar, he ultimately chose to break away from tradition in search of a more reliable method of acquiring knowledge. His dissatisfaction with existing philosophical systems and his admiration for the certainty of mathematics drove him to formulate his own unique approach to understanding reality. Descartes' early life and education provided him with both the tools and the motivation to challenge established ways of thinking. The classical and scholastic training he received at La Flèche gave him a strong foundation, but it was his own critical mindset that set him apart from his peers. His exposure to diverse fields of study, combined with his natural inclination for skepticism and rational inquiry, laid the groundwork for the revolutionary ideas he would later introduce. By questioning the validity of traditional knowledge and seeking a more certain foundation for truth, Descartes set himself on a path that would forever change the course of Western philosophy. After completing his formal education, René Descartes embarked on a journey that would significantly shape his intellectual development. Rather than immediately pursuing a career in law, as his family had hoped, he chose a path of exploration, seeking knowledge through first-hand experience. His decision to join the military may seem unusual for a philosopher, but for Descartes, it was less about warfare and more about exposing himself to new ideas, cultures, and ways of thinking. This period of travel and observation allowed him to develop a more independent perspective, ultimately influencing the formation of his philosophical and scientific ideas. In 1618, Descartes enlisted in the army of Prince Maurice of Nassau in the Dutch Republic. The Dutch military was one of the most advanced in Europe, and it served as a hub for scientific and mathematical innovation. While Descartes did not see much direct combat, he used his time in the army to study engineering, fortifications, and military strategy. More importantly, it was during this time that he met the Dutch scientist and mathematician Isaac Beeckman, who played a crucial role in furthering Descartes' interest in mathematical physics. Beekman introduced Descartes to the idea that mathematical principles could explain natural phenomena, reinforcing his belief in the power of reason and deduction. Descartes' intellectual curiosity extended beyond military science. The Dutch Republic was a center of commerce, art, and intellectual exchange, offering him the opportunity to engage with leading thinkers of the time. He was exposed to new developments in astronomy, physics, and medicine, which fueled his desire to establish a universal method of reasoning. This exposure helped shape his vision of a world governed by rational principles rather than mere tradition or authority. His experiences in the Netherlands strengthened his conviction that knowledge must be built on a foundation of certainty, rather than accepted blindly from past teachings. In 1619, Descartes left the Dutch army and traveled to Germany, where he enlisted in the Bavarian army during the early stages of the 30 Years' War. However, his interest in military service remained secondary to his philosophical quest. While stationed in Germany, he had what he later described as a profound intellectual awakening. On the night of November 10, 1619, in the town of Ulm, Descartes experienced a series of 3 dreams that he interpreted as a revelation about the unity of knowledge. These dreams convinced him that he was destined to develop a new, comprehensive method for understanding reality, one based on reason and logic rather than tradition or dogma. The significance of these dreams cannot be overstated, as they marked a turning point in Descartes' life. He interpreted them as a divine sign, guiding him toward his intellectual mission. He resolved to dedicate himself entirely to the pursuit of knowledge, seeking to create a philosophical system that could withstand even the most extreme doubt. This decision would later lead to the development of his famous method of doubt, a systematic process of questioning all beliefs to determine which ones could be known with absolute certainty. Following his revelation, Descartes continued his travels throughout Europe, engaging with various intellectual communities. He spent time in Bohemia, Hungary, and Austria, before eventually returning to France in 1622. During this period, he also visited Italy, where he explored the works of Galileo Galilei, one of the most influential scientific minds of the era. Descartes admired Galileo's use of mathematics to explain physical phenomena, and this admiration further reinforced his belief in the power of deductive reasoning. However, he also recognized the dangers of challenging established doctrines, as Galileo was already facing opposition from the Catholic Church for his heliocentric theories. In France, Descartes reconnected with his family and settled his financial affairs, ensuring that he had the freedom to focus entirely on intellectual pursuits. However, he soon realized that his homeland was not the ideal environment for independent philosophical inquiry. The intellectual climate in France was still heavily influenced by scholasticism, and open challenges to traditional authority were met with resistance. Descartes longed for a place where he could think and write without interference, leading him to make one of the most significant decisions of his life: to move to the Dutch Republic permanently. The Netherlands offered Descartes the intellectual freedom he desired. Unlike France, the Dutch Republic was known for its relatively open academic culture and tolerance for new ideas. Universities in cities like Leiden and Utrecht were centers of scientific and philosophical debate, and Descartes found himself surrounded by scholars who shared his commitment to reason and empirical inquiry. Over the next 2 decades, he would produce some of his most important works, laying the foundations for modern philosophy and mathematics. His time spent traveling through Europe had given Descartes a broad perspective on intellectual traditions and the limitations of conventional knowledge. He had observed firsthand the conflicts between emerging scientific discoveries and religious orthodoxy, as well as the challenges of relying on authority rather than direct reasoning. These experiences confirmed his belief that the only way to achieve true knowledge was through a systematic, rational method. He would spend the rest of his life refining and defending this approach, leading to the publication of Discourse on the Method in 1637. Descartes' military service and travels were not merely a diversion from his intellectual pursuits, but rather a crucial phase in his philosophical development. His encounters with leading scientists, his exposure to different intellectual traditions, and his personal revelations all contributed to his quest for certainty in knowledge. By rejecting blind adherence to tradition and seeking truth through reason, he set the stage for his groundbreaking philosophical and scientific contributions. His time in the military and his extensive travels were instrumental in shaping the rationalist approach that would later define modern philosophy. René Descartes' intellectual journey reached a turning point when he began formulating his own methodological approach to knowledge. His dissatisfaction with the traditional frameworks of philosophy, particularly scholasticism, drove him to search for a new foundation for human understanding. The result was a method based on radical doubt and rational inquiry, which would become one of the most influential developments in modern philosophy. This method, later known as the Cartesian method, sought to establish certainty in knowledge by systematically doubting all beliefs until only those that were absolutely indubitable remained. The foundations of Descartes' method were laid during his years of travel and self-reflection. His experiences in the military, his exposure to contemporary scientific advancements, and his intellectual exchanges with mathematicians and philosophers all played a role in shaping his thought. However, it was his deep engagement with mathematics that provided the clearest inspiration for his method. He admired the way mathematical truths were derived from self-evident axioms through logical deduction. Unlike the vague and often contradictory arguments of traditional philosophy, mathematical reasoning offered a clear and reliable path to knowledge. Descartes believed that philosophy should adopt the same level of certainty he found in mathematics. To achieve this, he proposed that all knowledge should be built upon a firm foundation, free from doubt. His solution was to apply a process of radical skepticism, systematically questioning every belief to determine which, if any, could withstand the most extreme doubt. By doing so, he aimed to discard all uncertain knowledge and rebuild human understanding from the ground up. This approach was outlined in his seminal work, Discourse on the Method, published in 1637. In Discourse on the Method, Descartes presented 4 key rules for guiding thought and achieving knowledge. The first rule was never to accept anything as true unless it was so clear and distinct that it could not be doubted. The second rule was to divide complex problems into smaller, more manageable parts. The third rule was to proceed in an orderly manner, starting with the simplest and most certain elements before moving to the more complex. Finally, the fourth rule was to ensure completeness by conducting thorough reviews and making sure nothing was overlooked. These rules provided a systematic framework for acquiring knowledge and became the basis for modern scientific and philosophical inquiry. Perhaps the most famous outcome of Descartes' method was his assertion of the foundational principle, cogito, ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. This statement emerged as the one truth that could not be doubted. Even if he were deceived about everything else, the very act of doubting proved that he, as a thinking being, existed. This realization provided Descartes with the unshakable foundation he had been seeking. From this point, he sought to reconstruct human knowledge by deducing further truths based on clear and distinct ideas. The Cartesian method also played a significant role in shaping modern epistemology, the branch of philosophy concerned with the nature and limits of human knowledge. Descartes' insistence on doubt as a tool for establishing certainty marked a significant departure from previous philosophical traditions, which often relied on faith, tradition, or authority. His method introduced a new way of thinking, one that emphasized the individual's ability to reason independently. This shift laid the groundwork for later developments in philosophy, including the Enlightenment's emphasis on reason and scientific inquiry. Beyond philosophy, Descartes' method had profound implications for the natural sciences. By promoting a systematic approach to investigation, he contributed to the development of the scientific method. His insistence on logical reasoning and empirical verification influenced thinkers such as Isaac Newton and Francis Bacon, who further refined the principles of scientific inquiry. His work in mathematics, particularly his development of Cartesian coordinates, also demonstrated the practical application of his method, linking abstract reasoning with observable reality. Despite its revolutionary nature, the Cartesian method was not without its critics. Many of Descartes' contemporaries questioned the validity of radical doubt as a starting point for knowledge. Skeptics argued that even cogito, ergo sum presuppose certain assumptions, such as the existence of logic and the reliability of human reasoning. Additionally, religious authorities were wary of his emphasis on reason over faith, fearing that his method could lead individuals to question religious doctrines. These debates highlighted the challenges of establishing a purely rational foundation for knowledge, an issue that continues to be explored in contemporary philosophy. Nonetheless, Descartes' method proved to be one of the most enduring contributions to Western thought. His emphasis on rationality and systematic inquiry influenced generations of philosophers, including Baruch Spinoza, Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, and Immanuel Kant. His ideas also permeated other disciplines, shaping discussions in psychology, artificial intelligence, and cognitive science. The Cartesian method's impact extends far beyond its original context, continuing to inspire new approaches to knowledge and discovery. The birth of the Cartesian method marked a pivotal moment in the history of philosophy and science. By challenging traditional ways of thinking and proposing a systematic approach to knowledge, Descartes transformed the intellectual landscape. His method of radical doubt and rational inquiry not only laid the foundation for modern philosophy, but also played a crucial role in the development of scientific thought. Though it faced criticism and refinement over time, the Cartesian method remains a cornerstone of Western intellectual tradition, reflecting Descartes' enduring influence on the pursuit of truth and understanding. One of René Descartes' most influential and controversial contributions to philosophy was his theory of mind-body dualism. This concept, which emerged from his broader philosophical method, proposed that the mind and body are fundamentally distinct substances. The dualist view of human nature had profound implications for philosophy, science, and theology, influencing debates on consciousness, personal identity, and the nature of reality. By asserting that the mind is separate from the body, Descartes sought to explain human thought and experience in a way that aligned with both rational inquiry and religious belief. Descartes' dualism was rooted in his method of radical doubt. After questioning everything he could possibly doubt, he arrived at the one indubitable truth. Cogito, ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. This realization led him to conclude that the essence of the self was thought, not the physical body. He argued that while the body is subject to mechanical laws and external influences, the mind is a purely thinking substance, independent of material existence. This distinction between the mental and the physical became known as Cartesian dualism. A central argument for Descartes' dualism was based on the principle of clear and distinct ideas. He believed that if two things could be conceived of separately, they must be distinct in reality. Since he could clearly and distinctly perceive the mind as a thinking, non-material entity and the body as an extended, material entity, he concluded that they must be separate substances. This led to the formulation of substance dualism, in which the mind, or soul, and body interact, but remain fundamentally different in nature. The interaction between the mind and body, however, presented a major philosophical problem. If the mind is a non-material substance and the body is a physical entity, how do they communicate? Descartes proposed that the interaction occurred in the pineal gland, a small structure in the brain. He suggested that the pineal gland served as a bridge between the immaterial mind and the physical body, transmitting signals between the two. While this hypothesis was based on limited anatomical knowledge at the time, it reflected his effort to reconcile dualism with the observable functions of the human body. Despite Descartes' efforts to explain mind-body interaction, his theory faced significant criticism. One of the primary objections was the interaction problem, famously articulated by later philosophers such as Princess Elizabeth of Bohemia. If the mind is entirely non-material, how can it exert influence on the physical body? The laws of physics dictate that material objects can only be moved by other material objects, making it difficult to explain how an immaterial mind could cause bodily actions. This challenge to dualism remains one of the most debated issues in philosophy of mind. Beyond its philosophical implications, Descartes' mind-body dualism had a lasting impact on scientific thought. By distinguishing between the mental and physical realms, he paved the way for mechanistic explanations of the body. His view allowed scientists to study physiology and medicine without necessarily invoking spiritual explanations, contributing to the rise of modern anatomy and neuroscience. However, his strict separation of mind and body also contributed to an ongoing divide between the sciences of the brain and theories of consciousness, a division that persists in contemporary discussions of cognitive science and artificial intelligence. Descartes' dualism also influenced religious and metaphysical debates. By identifying the mind, or soul, as distinct from the body, he provided a philosophical basis for belief in the immortality of the soul, which aligned with Christian theology. Many theologians embraced his view as a way to reconcile scientific inquiry with religious doctrine. However, others were skeptical of his mechanistic approach to the body, fearing that it reduced human beings to mere machines without divine purpose. His ideas contributed to tensions between rationalist philosophy and theological interpretations of human nature. In addition to its impact on philosophy and science, Cartesian dualism shaped later discussions of personal identity. Philosophers such as John Locke and David Hume explored the implications of Descartes' theory, questioning whether personal identity resided in the continuity of thought or in physical existence. The mind-body problem also became central to existentialist and phenomenological traditions, with thinkers like Jean-Paul Sartre and Maurice Merleau-Ponty arguing for alternative views of consciousness that rejected strict dualism. Despite ongoing criticism, Descartes' theory of mind-body dualism remains a foundational concept in philosophy of mind. Many modern theories, including property dualism and functionalism, have developed in response to Cartesian dualism, either refining or challenging its core principles. Neuroscientists and cognitive scientists continue to explore the relationship between consciousness and brain activity, often engaging with the same fundamental questions that Descartes first posed. The enduring relevance of dualism demonstrates its profound influence on how we understand the nature of self-awareness and human experience. Descartes' theory of mind-body dualism was one of his most significant and lasting contributions to philosophy. By distinguishing the mind from the body, he introduced a framework that shaped centuries of debate on consciousness, identity, and the nature of reality. Though his theory faced major challenges, particularly in explaining how an immaterial mind could interact with a physical body, it set the stage for future inquiries into the relationship between thought and matter. Whether accepted, modified, or rejected, Cartesian dualism remains a crucial reference point in discussions about the mind, highlighting Descartes' enduring impact on Western thought. René Descartes' influence extended far beyond philosophy. He played a crucial role in shaping the foundations of modern science. His method of rational inquiry, commitment to mathematical principles, and mechanistic view of nature laid the groundwork for significant developments in physics, biology, and medicine. By applying his philosophical principles to scientific inquiry, Descartes helped bridge the gap between medieval Aristotelian traditions and the emerging scientific revolution. His work not only challenged existing notions about nature, but also inspired generations of scientists to adopt a more systematic and empirical approach to understanding the world. One of Descartes' most important contributions to science was his emphasis on mathematics as the key to unlocking the mysteries of the natural world. He believed that the universe operated according to rational principles that could be expressed in mathematical terms. This idea was revolutionary at a time when scientific explanations often relied on qualitative descriptions rather than precise calculations. His development of Cartesian coordinates, a system that allows geometric shapes to be represented algebraically, demonstrated his belief that mathematics could serve as a universal language for describing nature. This innovation provided a foundation for analytic geometry, which later influenced Isaac Newton's calculus and the formulation of classical mechanics. Descartes' mechanistic view of the universe further distinguished him from earlier thinkers. Unlike the Aristotelian perspective, which attributed natural phenomena to inherent qualities or purposes, Descartes argued that the physical world operated like a vast machine governed by deterministic laws. In his work Principles of Philosophy, 1644, he proposed that all natural occurrences, from planetary motion to biological processes, could be explained through mechanical interactions. This mechanistic philosophy laid the groundwork for later scientific advances, particularly in physics, where it influenced the search for fundamental laws of motion and energy. His commitment to a mechanistic worldview was particularly evident in his approach to biology and medicine. In Treatise on Man, Descartes described the human body as a complex machine composed of interdependent parts, functioning according to physical laws. He hypothesized that bodily functions, such as digestion, circulation, and muscle movement, could be explained without invoking a vital force or soul. While some of his physiological ideas were incorrect, such as his belief that the pineal gland controlled bodily movement, his general approach to studying the body as a mechanical system influenced later developments in anatomy and physiology. His ideas anticipated discoveries in neurology and inspired early medical researchers to adopt a more empirical approach to studying human health. Another major area of Descartes' scientific work was optics. In his Dioptrique, 1637, he explored the nature of light and vision, arguing that light travels in straight lines and behaves similarly to waves. He also formulated the law of refraction, which describes how light bends when passing through different media. This work contributed significantly to the field of optics and provided the theoretical basis for later advancements in lens making, ultimately leading to improvements in microscopes and telescopes. His insights in this area were later confirmed and expanded upon by scientists such as Christian Huygens and Isaac Newton. Despite his contributions, Descartes' scientific theories were not without controversy. His mechanistic interpretation of nature was met with resistance from religious authorities, who viewed it as conflicting with theological explanations of life and the soul. Additionally, some of his hypotheses, such as his vortex theory of planetary motion, were later disproven by Newtonian physics. However, even when his specific ideas were incorrect, his broader methodology, the emphasis on reason, experimentation, and mathematical modeling, remained influential in shaping scientific inquiry. Descartes' ideas also had a profound impact on the development of scientific methodology. Although Francis Bacon is often credited with formalizing the inductive scientific method, Descartes contributed by emphasizing the importance of deduction, starting with clear and undeniable principles and logically deriving conclusions from them. His insistence on methodological skepticism influenced later scientists to rigorously test their hypotheses, ensuring that scientific knowledge was built on a foundation of certainty rather than mere speculation. The Cartesian approach to science also extended to astronomy. While Descartes accepted the Copernican model of the solar system, he hesitated to publish his views openly due to the persecution of Galileo by the Catholic Church. In Le Monde, the World, he had originally planned to support the heliocentric model, but chose not to publish it during his lifetime. His cautious approach reflected the broader tension between science and religious doctrine in the 17th century. Nonetheless, his mechanistic explanation of planetary motion, though ultimately flawed, represented an important step toward a more scientific understanding of the cosmos. Descartes' influence on science can be seen in the work of later thinkers such as Newton, Leibniz, and Huygens. His emphasis on rational inquiry and mathematical precision helped pave the way for the Newtonian revolution, which unified physics under universal laws of motion and gravitation. Moreover, his mechanistic model of nature influenced the Enlightenment's shift toward empirical observation and scientific reasoning as the primary means of understanding the world. The Cartesian legacy thus extended far beyond philosophy, shaping the trajectory of scientific progress for centuries to come. René Descartes' contributions to modern science were as transformative as his philosophical ideas. His insistence on mathematical reasoning, his mechanistic view of nature, and his methodological skepticism helped shape the foundations of physics, biology, and optics. While some of his specific theories were later revised or replaced, his broader impact on scientific thought remains undeniable. By challenging traditional assumptions and advocating for a systematic approach to knowledge, Descartes helped lay the groundwork for the scientific revolution and the modern scientific method. His influence endures in contemporary science, demonstrating the lasting power of rational inquiry in the pursuit of truth. René Descartes' philosophical ideas not only reshaped the intellectual landscape of his time, but also laid the foundation for modern philosophy. His methodological approach, emphasis on reason, and commitment to foundational certainty influenced countless thinkers who came after him. From epistemology to metaphysics, Descartes' ideas set the stage for both support and criticism, leading to the emergence of new philosophical traditions. His legacy extends to rationalism, empiricism, and even contemporary debates in philosophy of mind and artificial intelligence. One of Descartes' most significant contributions was his role as the father of rationalism. Rationalism, as a philosophical school, asserts that reason is the primary source of knowledge, rather than sensory experience. In his meditations on first philosophy, Descartes sought to establish knowledge through pure reason, using systematic doubt as a tool to discard uncertain beliefs. His conclusion that cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, was the only indubitable truth exemplified the rationalist approach, in which logical reasoning serves as the foundation for knowledge. This emphasis on reason over empirical observation set the stage for later rationalist philosophers, such as Baruch Spinoza and Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. However, Descartes' rationalism also sparked opposition, particularly from the empiricist tradition. Philosophers such as John Locke, George Berkeley, and David Hume rejected the Cartesian notion that knowledge could be derived solely from reason. Instead, they argued that all knowledge originates from sensory experience. Locke, for instance, famously proposed that the human mind is a tabula rasa, blank slate, at birth, acquiring knowledge only through experience. Hume went further, challenging Descartes' notion of the self by arguing that human consciousness consists of a series of fleeting perceptions rather than a unified, thinking substance. These critiques demonstrated the enduring influence of Descartes, as his ideas provided a foundation against which later thinkers defined their own philosophical positions. Descartes' dualism also had a profound impact on metaphysics, particularly in discussions about the nature of consciousness and the relationship between the mind and body. His assertion that the mind and body are fundamentally different substances led to ongoing debates that continue to shape philosophy of mind. The mind-body problem that Descartes introduced remains unresolved, with contemporary philosophers and neuroscientists still grappling with questions about how consciousness arises from the brain and whether mental states can be reduced to physical processes. While some thinkers, such as Gilbert Ryle, criticize Descartes' dualism as the ghost in the machine, others, such as David Chalmers, have explored updated versions of dualism to address modern scientific findings. Beyond epistemology and metaphysics, Descartes' ideas also influenced political and ethical philosophy. His method of radical doubt encouraged a spirit of intellectual independence that resonated with Enlightenment thinkers. Philosophers such as Immanuel Kant were deeply influenced by Descartes' pursuit of certainty, incorporating rationalist elements into their own theories. Kant's critique of pure reason, for example, sought to reconcile rationalist and empiricist traditions by arguing that while knowledge begins with experience, reason plays a crucial role in organizing it. This synthesis of ideas would not have been possible without the intellectual challenges posed by Descartes. Descartes also contributed to discussions about personal identity, free will, and determinism. His belief in an immaterial soul separate from the body had implications for moral responsibility and the nature of human agency. If the mind is distinct from the body, as Descartes claimed, then does it have control over physical actions? This question remains central in contemporary debates about free will and the role of consciousness in decision-making. Some philosophers argue that Descartes' dualism supports the idea of moral responsibility, while others contend that modern neuroscience undermines the notion of a separate, autonomous mind. Another important aspect of Descartes' legacy is his influence on scientific methodology. While he is primarily known as a philosopher, his insistence on systematic doubt and rational analysis shaped the way science developed. By advocating for a clear and logical approach to inquiry, Descartes contributed to the transition from medieval scholasticism to modern scientific reasoning. His ideas were embraced by later philosophers of science, such as Karl Popper, who emphasized falsifiability as a criterion for scientific theories. Even in contemporary discussions about artificial intelligence and computational theories of mind, Descartes' framework continues to inform debates about the nature of intelligence and the distinction between human and machine cognition. Despite his lasting influence, Descartes' ideas have not been without controversy. Critics have pointed out that his radical doubt, while a powerful philosophical tool, may lead to an unsolvable skepticism. If we can doubt everything, including the reliability of our own reasoning, how can we ever establish certainty? This paradox remains a central challenge in epistemology. Additionally, his mechanistic view of the physical world, while groundbreaking in many ways, has been criticized for oversimplifying the complexity of human experience. Thinkers in existentialism, phenomenology, and pragmatism have challenged Cartesian assumptions, emphasizing the importance of lived experience, social context, and practical engagement with the world. Despite these criticisms, Descartes' influence remains undeniable. His method of doubt, his rationalist approach to knowledge, and his exploration of the mind-body relationship continue to inspire philosophical inquiry. Whether scholars seek to defend, modify, or reject his ideas, they must engage with the fundamental questions he posed. His legacy extends not only to philosophy, but also to psychology, artificial intelligence, and even neuroscience, where researchers continue to explore the nature of thought and consciousness through empirical and theoretical means. René Descartes' impact on modern philosophy is profound and far-reaching. His rationalist epistemology, dualist metaphysics, and methodological innovations laid the groundwork for centuries of philosophical debate. While his ideas have been challenged and refined over time, they remain central to discussions in epistemology, metaphysics, and philosophy of mind. Whether one agrees or disagrees with Descartes, his intellectual contributions continue to shape the way we think about knowledge, existence, and the nature of human consciousness. His legacy is a testament to the enduring power of philosophical inquiry in the quest for understanding. René Descartes' relationship with religion was complex and often paradoxical. As a deeply religious man, he sought to reconcile his faith with his philosophical inquiries. At the same time, his method of radical doubt and emphasis on reason challenged traditional theological doctrines and contributed to the secularization of philosophical thought. His writings on the existence of God, the nature of the soul, and divine perfection reflected his attempt to harmonize rationalism with Christian belief. However, his ideas also attracted criticism from both religious authorities and skeptics who saw his philosophical system as either too dependent on faith or too radical in its questioning of traditional dogma. One of Descartes' central theological arguments was his proof for the existence of God. In his meditations on First Philosophy, he presented several arguments to demonstrate that God must necessarily exist. One of his most famous proofs was the ontological argument, which built upon the ideas of Saint Anselm. Descartes argued that the very concept of a perfect being implies its existence. Since existence is a necessary attribute of perfection, a truly perfect God cannot be imagined as non-existent. This argument, though influential, faced strong objections, particularly from later empiricist philosophers who challenged the notion that existence could be derived purely from logical reasoning. Another key argument Descartes provided was the trademark argument. He claimed that the idea of an infinitely perfect being could not have originated from within his own finite mind. Since humans are imperfect and limited, they could not have conceived of a perfect God unless such a being actually existed. Therefore, Descartes concluded that God himself must have implanted this idea in the human mind. This line of reasoning sought to reinforce the reliability of human reason, as Descartes argued that a benevolent and non-deceptive God would not allow people to be systematically misled in their pursuit of truth. Despite these arguments, Descartes' philosophical approach to theology was not universally accepted. His reliance on reason as the foundation for belief in God seemed to diminish the role of faith, which was central to traditional Christian doctrine. The Catholic Church, wary of any philosophy that could undermine religious authority, scrutinized Descartes' work closely. Although his writings were not outright condemned as heretical, they were placed on the Church's index of prohibited books in 1663, several years after his death. This indicates that while Descartes sought to align his philosophy with Christianity, his rationalist method was still seen as a potential challenge to religious orthodoxy. Descartes' concept of divine perfection also played a significant role in his epistemology. He argued that because God is perfect and not a deceiver, human reason must be fundamentally reliable when used correctly. This belief underpinned his rejection of radical skepticism. If an all-powerful and benevolent God exists, then the external world and the faculties of human cognition cannot be inherently deceptive. This assertion was crucial in helping Descartes move beyond doubt and establish a foundation for certain knowledge. However, it also raised difficult questions. If God is perfect, why does human error exist? Descartes attempted to resolve this issue by suggesting that while human reason is a divine gift, mistakes arise when the will extends beyond the limits of understanding. Another major theological implication of Descartes' philosophy was his distinction between the mind and body. His substance dualism had consequences for religious debates about the soul's immortality. By arguing that the mind, or soul, was a non-material, thinking substance, distinct from the physical body, Descartes provided a philosophical foundation for belief in life after death. This aspect of his philosophy aligned well with Christian teachings on the soul's eternal nature. However, his mechanistic view of the body, which described biological processes in purely physical terms, led some to worry that his ideas could reduce human beings to mere machines, undermining the spiritual dimension of existence. Descartes also influenced discussions on divine intervention and the laws of nature. His mechanistic view of the universe suggested that natural phenomena operated according to fixed, rational principles, which could be understood through scientific inquiry. While he maintained that God was the ultimate creator and sustainer of the universe, he largely rejected the idea of continuous divine interference in natural events. Instead, he argued that God had designed the universe with such perfection that it could function autonomously according to mathematical laws. This perspective contributed to the development of deism, a philosophical position that emerged in the Enlightenment, which held that God created the universe but does not intervene in its affairs. Despite his efforts to balance faith and reason, Descartes inadvertently contributed to the rise of secular philosophy. His method of radical doubt encouraged thinkers to question established religious doctrines, leading to new approaches that emphasize human reason over divine revelation. Later philosophers, such as Baruch Spinoza and Voltaire, expanded upon Cartesian principles to develop more secular worldviews. Even though Descartes himself remained a believer, his intellectual legacy helped shape the rationalist currents that would challenge religious authority in the centuries that followed. Descartes' theological contributions continue to be debated today, particularly in discussions about the relationship between science and religion. Some scholars view his attempt to reconcile faith and reason as a successful model for integrating religious belief with intellectual inquiry. Others argue that his philosophy, whether intentionally or not, paved the way for secularism by prioritizing reason as the ultimate source of knowledge. Regardless of one's perspective, it is clear that his work profoundly shaped the way philosophers, theologians, and scientists engage with questions of existence, divinity, and human understanding. René Descartes' engagement with religion reveals both his deep faith and his commitment to rational inquiry. His philosophical arguments for God's existence, the reliability of human reason, and the immortality of the soul sought to reconcile religious belief with the emerging scientific worldview. However, his emphasis on reason also contributed to the secularization of philosophy, challenging traditional religious thought in ways that he may not have fully anticipated. Whether viewed as a defender of faith or a catalyst for skepticism, Descartes' influence on religious and philosophical discourse remains undeniable. His legacy continues to inspire debates on the intersection of faith and reason, shaping our understanding of God, knowledge, and the human soul. René Descartes' final years were marked by both intellectual achievements and personal struggles. Having spent much of his life traveling through Europe, writing, and engaging in philosophical debates, he eventually accepted an invitation that would lead him to an untimely death. Despite the challenges he faced, his influence on philosophy, mathematics, and science only grew after his passing, securing his place as one of history's most significant thinkers. His final years, although short-lived, symbolized the culmination of his intellectual journey and the beginning of his long-lasting legacy. In 1649, Descartes received an invitation from Queen Christina of Sweden, a monarch known for her deep interest in philosophy and the arts. She admired Descartes' work and wished to learn directly from him. At first, Descartes was hesitant to accept, as Sweden's harsh winter climate and rigid court schedule did not appeal to him. However, the opportunity to engage with royalty and expand his philosophical influence ultimately convinced him to travel to Stockholm. He arrived in Sweden in the fall of 1649, where he was expected to tutor the Queen in philosophy. His time at the Swedish court was challenging. Queen Christina, a highly disciplined intellectual, insisted on meeting Descartes for lessons at 5 o'clock in the morning. This early schedule was particularly difficult for Descartes, who was accustomed to working late into the night and rising late in the day. The freezing Swedish winter also took a toll on his health, as he was not used to such extreme cold. These factors combined to weaken him physically, making him vulnerable to illness. In February 1650, Descartes contracted pneumonia. Despite receiving medical attention, his condition worsened rapidly. His weakened immune system and the lack of effective treatments at the time left him with little chance of recovery. On February 11, 1650, at the age of 53, René Descartes passed away in Stockholm. His death marked the end of an era, but his ideas continued to shape intellectual thought for centuries to come. Following his death, Descartes' works became even more influential. His philosophical method inspired later rationalist thinkers such as Baruch Spinoza and Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, who expanded upon his ideas and developed new metaphysical and epistemological theories. Meanwhile, empiricists like John Locke and David Hume responded critically to his rationalist approach, leading to the famous debate between rationalism and empiricism that shaped modern philosophy. This ongoing dialogue demonstrated the enduring relevance of Descartes' work. In addition to his impact on philosophy, Descartes' contributions to mathematics and science continued to influence scholars. His development of Cartesian coordinates revolutionized mathematics, providing a foundation for analytic geometry and later advancements in calculus. The Cartesian plane, which allows geometric problems to be solved algebraically, remains one of the most fundamental concepts in modern mathematics. Without his innovations, many of the scientific and technological advancements that followed might not have been possible. Descartes' ideas also shaped the development of modern science. His mechanistic view of nature, in which the physical world operates according to mathematical laws, contributed to the rise of the scientific method. By emphasizing reason and systematic inquiry, he helped lay the groundwork for later scientists such as Isaac Newton. whose laws of motion and universal gravitation built upon the principles of Cartesian physics. Although some of Descartes' scientific theories were later revised or disproven, his methodological approach influenced the way science was conducted. Despite his achievements, Descartes' legacy was not without controversy. His dualist philosophy, which proposed a strict separation between mind and body, sparked debates that continue to this day. While some thinkers embraced dualism as a means of explaining consciousness and personal identity, others criticized it for failing to account for the interaction between mental and physical states. Modern neuroscience, in particular, has challenged Cartesian dualism, suggesting that mental processes are closely tied to brain activity. Nevertheless, Descartes' exploration of the mind-body problem remains a foundational topic in philosophy of mind. Religious authorities also had mixed reactions to Descartes' ideas. While he maintained a belief in God and sought to align his philosophy with Christian doctrine, his reliance on reason and skepticism raised concerns among church officials. Some of his works were placed on the Catholic Church's Index of Prohibited Books, reflecting fears that his philosophy could encourage doubt rather than faith. However, his influence persisted, and even religious thinkers engaged with his ideas to refine their own theological positions. The final years and legacy of René Descartes illustrate the profound and lasting impact of his work. Though his time in Sweden was brief and ultimately led to his death, his intellectual contributions continued to shape philosophy, mathematics, and science long after he was gone. His method of doubt, rationalist approach, and dualist metaphysics influenced countless thinkers, sparking debates that endure to this day. While some of his ideas have been challenged or revised, his legacy remains a testament to the power of reason and critical inquiry. René Descartes' work continues to inspire scholars and students alike, proving that his famous declaration, cogito, ergo sum, will never be forgotten. René Descartes' influence on modern philosophy, science, and mathematics is immeasurable. His contributions laid the foundation for entire fields of inquiry, and his ideas have continued to shape intellectual discourse for centuries. From epistemology and metaphysics to mathematics and the scientific method, Descartes' work touched virtually every area of human knowledge, and his legacy is still a driving force in contemporary thought. As we reflect on his life and ideas, it becomes clear that Descartes' intellectual legacy has transcended his time, cementing his status as one of the most pivotal figures in the history of Western thought. Descartes' most immediate contribution to philosophy was his transformation of epistemology, particularly with his method of doubt and the search for indubitable knowledge. His famous dictum cogito, ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, became not just the foundation for his own philosophy, but a hallmark for modern philosophical inquiry. In seeking absolute certainty through methodical skepticism, Descartes set in motion a new way of thinking about knowledge that moved away from medieval scholasticism and theological doctrines. The idea that knowledge must be built upon certain foundations, free from doubt, is one that continues to influence contemporary epistemology. The radical skepticism Descartes employed pushed the boundaries of what could be known with certainty, while also elevating the importance of the mind in the acquisition of knowledge. His dualism, the belief in a distinction between mind and body, revolutionized discussions about personal identity and consciousness. The modern philosophy of mind can trace much of its evolution back to Descartes' exploration of the nature of the self and its relationship to the body. Though Cartesian dualism has been critiqued by later philosophers and neuroscientists, the conversation he initiated remains one of the central topics in philosophy today. In addition to his work in epistemology and metaphysics, Descartes also profoundly shaped the development of mathematics. His invention of analytic geometry, which merged algebra and geometry into a unified framework, provided the groundwork for calculus and many other mathematical innovations. Cartesian coordinates and the concept of the Cartesian plane have become ubiquitous in modern mathematics, allowing for the geometric representation of algebraic equations and facilitating countless advancements in physics, engineering, and computer science. Descartes' influence on mathematics is so deeply embedded in the field that it remains integral to mathematical education and research worldwide. Furthermore, Descartes' emphasis on systematic doubt and rational inquiry laid the intellectual groundwork for the development of the modern scientific method. His mechanistic view of the universe, in which natural phenomena were explained by mathematical laws, encouraged subsequent generations of scientists to explore the world through observation, experimentation, and reason. Figures such as Isaac Newton and Galileo Galilei built on Descartes' ideas, advancing scientific knowledge in ways that would eventually lead to the birth of modern physics. While some of Descartes' scientific theories have been overturned, particularly his understanding of physics and the nature of motion, his approach to scientific inquiry remains a cornerstone of the scientific revolution. In the realm of religion, Descartes' attempt to reconcile reason with faith left a lasting impact. His arguments for the existence of God, the immortality of the soul, and the reliability of human cognition attempted to harmonize scientific exploration with religious belief. Descartes was a devout Christian, and he sought to defend the compatibility of his philosophical system with Christian teachings. However, his reliance on reason as a tool for understanding the divine and the natural world made him a central figure in the larger tension between science and religion. His ideas played a role in the development of deism, a belief system that emphasized reason over revelation and questioned traditional religious dogma. Descartes' influence also extended beyond the realm of philosophy, as his ideas sparked the rise of rationalism as a dominant school of thought. Philosophers like Spinoza and Leibniz expanded upon Descartes' emphasis on reason as the foundation of knowledge, creating comprehensive systems of thought that further solidified the role of rational inquiry in intellectual life. At the same time, Descartes' rationalism provided a foil for the empiricists, philosophers like Locke, Berkeley, and Hume, who argued that knowledge stems primarily from sensory experience. The tension between these two schools of thought, rationalism and empiricism, has been central to the development of modern philosophy. Despite being criticized by some for his dualism and skepticism, Descartes' work ultimately paved the way for the Enlightenment. His insistence on the power of reason and his challenge to traditional authority encouraged a spirit of intellectual independence that resonated deeply with Enlightenment thinkers. In a period marked by a growing emphasis on human autonomy and the pursuit of knowledge, Descartes' ideas served as a touchstone for debates about the nature of knowledge, the limits of human understanding, and the role of science in society. His ideas would help fuel the intellectual revolution that led to a dramatic transformation of European culture and politics. In the modern era, Descartes' legacy persists in various fields, from artificial intelligence to cognitive science. Contemporary discussions about the nature of consciousness, the relationship between the mind and the brain, and the potential for artificial intelligence are deeply influenced by Cartesian ideas. Descartes' conception of the mind as a distinct, thinking substance continues to inform debates about the nature of selfhood and personal identity. The questions he raised about the mind-body relationship remain central to interdisciplinary fields, including neuroscience, psychology, and philosophy of mind. Even as advancements in science and technology challenge Cartesian assumptions, Descartes' influence on how we think about the mind and consciousness remains undeniable. Ultimately, Descartes' legacy is not just one of intellectual achievements, but also of intellectual transformation. His work altered the course of Western thought, shaping the trajectory of modern philosophy, mathematics, science, and even religion. Whether one agrees with his conclusions or not, Descartes' insistence on doubt, reason, and the search for certainty has shaped how generations of thinkers have approached knowledge. His intellectual courage in questioning accepted truths and his desire to construct a new, rational framework for understanding the world make him a figure whose impact extends far beyond his time. The enduring legacy of René Descartes is marked by the far-reaching consequences of his philosophical, mathematical, and scientific ideas. His contributions laid the foundation for subsequent intellectual developments, shaping the course of modern thought in ways that continue to resonate today. Descartes' exploration of reason, doubt, and the nature of knowledge transformed how we understand the world, the self, and the relationship between the mind and body. The ongoing relevance of his work, despite its criticisms and the challenges posed by later thinkers, attests to his profound influence on the development of modern Western thought. René Descartes may have passed from this world, but his intellectual spirit remains alive in the continued search for understanding, knowledge, and truth.